strokes for different folks and use whatever works. You know, we're not there yet, right? Now in this case, I want to talk about a few push the envelope things. You know, it's you know, I remember giving a talk to a group in Baltimore some years ago. It was like, you know, young community leaders, you know, from different walks, and some of them were older. I said, so how many of you support needle exchange programs? This was 10 years ago. And almost 85% raised their hands. I said, how many of you old enough supported needle exchange programs back in the late 80s, early 90s, when your brave mayor, Kurt Schmoke, was proposing that and such? And maybe a quarter raised their hand. And I said, you know something? In the time it took you to understand that this was the right thing to do, a few thousand people died in your city as a result of the failure of Baltimore to institute these policies. There is a cost, a human and physical cost, to a slow learning curve. Well, now the question is, for you all here, and for us as society, where are we at an equivalent point where we think we're being enlightened, but where our learning curve is slow? And the thing I want to put out there, you know, people are talking about, you know, we need, for example, safe injection sites, right? You can't even get needle exchange programs in the South. I mean, it's crazy. You know, I mean, you know, you got needle exchange programs now in Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, China, and Iran, but not in most states in the South. I mean, you know, I don't know what to say. You now have in many countries, in 60 cities, safe injection programs, right? Basically a needle exchange program with a room in the back with a nurse so that you can inject safely, clean needle. It takes people off the streets, you eliminate overdose fatalities, you reduce risk, and there's a net fiscal benefit as well, right? So win, 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 win. I think we'll get one going in San Francisco or New York or New Mexico or someplace, or Seattle in the next few years, but it's already standard operating procedure. The evidence is conclusive in other parts of the world, from Vancouver to Sydney to Europe, right? But the one I want to push you on is, there's one approach being used for people who are addicted to heroin. That's now, the evidence is in. It's done in Europe, it's done in Canada even a little bit, but we're not even talking about the US. And here I'm talking about heroin maintenance, right? You know, the Swiss did it. I mean, the British really did it in a small way, but never really researched it carefully. 20 years ago, the Swiss had a problem, right? Lots of heroin, drug deals, all this sort of stuff. They tried to lock them up, and they pushed them into something called Needle Park, and that worked for a while, and then it got unruly, and they closed it down. And yeah, okay. And then basically what they said, we're going to try this. We're going to set up clinics first as a research process. And people who have been addicted to heroin on and off for years, who have tried methadone, didn't work, tried drug-free, didn't work, been in jail, you know, a lot of them have HIV, almost everyone's got Hep C. Right? Okay, come to this clinic. You can come up to 3 times a day. You can get pharmaceutical-grade heroin, and most of these clinics, as much as you want in one sitting, morning, noon, and night. Can't take it home. You'll also get a baseline methadone. You'll get other medications that you need. You'll get assistance with social service and counseling and things that, you know, like a really good quality methadone program, right? But providing as well pharmaceutical heroin, right? Well, what happened? Did everybody go crazy? Were they knocking down the doors? Were people like, you know what happened? People went in this program. First they started using more heroin because they could. Then they started using less because they realized it felt better to use less. They started withdrawing from the drug scene. They stopped using as much cocaine and other drugs like that. Their arrests went down dramatically. Involvement in crime went down dramatically. HIV and Hep C risk behaviors increased. Health increased. Weight increased. All sorts of things. Some people began to get part-time work, reconnected with their families, stabilized their lives. 20% of the people at some point said, I'm tired of schlepping to this clinic 2-3 times a day. Let me try to make the methadone work this time. And they make the oral methadone work. Another 20% said, you know what? To hell with all this stuff. I spent years taking methadone, street heroin, now legal heroin. Enough. Now I want to get clean. And it worked. Clean, I shouldn't use the word clean, but get drug-free, right? Why? Well, the American model is the only way you get a drug addict to be clean. You need that, you know, that hammer of the criminal justice system. You know, our model in America is, we arrested you for drug possession. Well, by definition, first of all, you got a problem because you were in possession of this. You are a drug abuser. I don't care if you only use it occasionally. You're a drug abuser because it's illegal. In America, the definition of drug abuse includes simply using an illegal drug even only once a year. That's drug abuse once a year, right? But if you do have a problem, our view is, well, the way we do is we hit you over the head with a hammer. We'll give you a couple of chances and not throw you in jail. Go to that treatment program that me, the nice drug court judge, is going to send you to, right? But if you cannot or will not stop using, I'm sorry, but we have to lock you up. Because what you are doing is violating the law, and ultimately you deserve to be punished for violating the law and putting that forbidden drug into your body, right? approach. There's an approach which says we're not going to, the Portuguese approach to some extent, which is we're not going to give you the drug, but we're not going to lock you up. I'm sorry, we arrest you with drugs, we're not going to lock you up. We're going to bring you to a dissuasion committee, try to dissuade you from using drugs. If you don't have a problem, we'll tell you to get lost. If you do, we'll try to help you. And we'll send you not to treatment, because we know a lot of drug addicts don't want to go to treatment, but we'll tell you to go to the health clinic, where maybe, because everyone wants to go to a health clinic, everybody's got a problem. And while you're in the health clinic, maybe get some treatment, and maybe you can understand the ways in which your drug use is undermining your health, right? But if you keep using, sorry, we're still not going to lock you up. Keep using, sorry. If you're really a bad guy, we'll catch you for something else and we'll lock you up for that, but not for drug use per se, right? But in the Swiss approach, what they said is, you come here, we'll give you the drug, right? And if you're still using other drugs on the side, we want to know about it, but you still get the heroin and the methadone and this sort of stuff. And what happened was, people, they show up, their dream come true. Here's the white powder that they've been spending their life hustling for, waking up in the money to get the money for, find a place to score, all this sort of stuff. Here it is, free, as much as you want. You just can't take it home with you, right? But here it is, right? And people, for the first time, are able to look in the mirror and go, what the hell am I doing? I'm spending my life chasing this white powder, which doesn't even get me that high anymore. What am I doing? The American approach is, here's the fucking mirror, look at it, or if you don't, I'm putting you in jail. Here it was, here's your drug. Now look in the mirror. Look in the mirror when you want. And that self-realization, understanding that the fundamental underlying principle of both harm reduction and the 12 Steps movement is about dignity, self-dignity, recovery, discovery of one's dignity and how one does that. And one typically does not achieve or find oneself with dignity through a coerced, threatening method. One does it by coming there on your own 2 feet and being able to stand up and get there. That's not only a more dignified and human rights-driven way to deal with the problems of drug addiction in our society, it also can be a more effective way and a fiscally less expensive way as well, right? So Switzerland did this, it became national policy. The police chiefs are the biggest champions because it reduces acquisitive crime by drug addicts, reduces black markets, it gives a nods to public health. Then Germany and Netherlands, they did research programs that worked there as well. Then Canada and England and Spain worked there as well. Denmark finally said, skip the research program. If it works for Germans and Dutch and Swiss, why won't it work for Danes? And besides, isn't there actually an ethical issue when every study you've done shows you that the group getting that pharmaceutical heroin has better outcomes than the control group? Can we ethically still construct a control group knowing the outcomes in advance, right? Now in Vancouver, they got another study. It turns out if you control double-blind pharmaceutical heroin and morphine, people can tell the difference. Pharmaceutical heroin, injectable methadone, tell the difference. Pharmaceutical heroin and Dilaudid, I think it's hydromorphone, right? Which hundreds of thousands of Americans take every year. Long-term experienced heroin addicts cannot tell the difference between heroin and Dilaudid. Now what does that mean? It means tomorrow, if every hospital in America stopped giving Dilaudid and started giving pharmaceutical heroin instead, and you didn't know, almost nobody would know the difference. No different rates of addiction, maybe slightly different, but basically they're not able to tell the difference. It means if we snapped our fingers tomorrow and all the heroin in the world disappeared and was replaced by Dilaudid, people wouldn't know. If you spelled heroin, D-I-L-A-U-D-I-D, or Dilaudid, H-E-R-O-I-N, people wouldn't know. What makes heroin, heroin, is the name heroin, right? Somebody said, well, I don't call it heroin. There was a guy trying to get this going in Austria. He said, I gave a presentation about this really great new treatment for severe heroin addiction. I said, it's called diamorphine. Everybody loved the idea. It was only at the end I said, diamorphine is actually heroin. But the idea of understanding this thing and the extent to which the addiction and perception is around all of that is pivotally important. It's the area where it's a disgrace that the United States does not have research trials with these policies in place to do these things. The fact that safe injection and heroin maintenance, pick up New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, all the European research journals, evidence is hands down, no debate in the scientific literature anymore. But in America still, we can't talk about it. Sometimes that's why I still think that trying to do really innovative drug abuse research in America is like trying to do innovative social science research in the old Soviet Union. It's basically, there are certain permitted areas, and there's a whole range of other research questions in which, the authorities that be, they don't really want those questions to be asked or those answers to be given. And for those of you who dare to submit a proposal raising one of these controversial issues, even though the fact is not being invited by the RFPs that are going out by our funding agencies, which fund 90% of all drug abuse research in the world, right? Well, what happens? People develop political blinders because they understand that if you want to work in these controversial areas, it's more likely your proposal for funding will be sent to somebody who doesn't agree with you or doesn't like you. It means that you are less likely to be invited to serve on a grant committee. It means you're less likely to get your phone calls returned. It's all the way. Somebody who works in Singapore told me that's how the Singapore establishment works, right? Nobody's really going to jail. It's where you're on the in or the out, and all the negative consequences of being on the out. People develop political blinders, and those political blinders become intellectual blinders, where you start to forget to even ask the interesting questions because the RFPs aren't requesting them, and you're only looking like this. I've never been to a meeting of CPDD, the Committees on Problems of Drug Dependence, but what I hear is these are the hard scientists, and it's just like the bigger context, the extent to which their research results are being cherry-picked by people who support a coercive policy and ignored when they come to opposite conclusions, the extent to which their research agendas and life agendas are being shaped politically by political forces in ways that they choose or even become unconscious of being aware of, is a fundamental problem. So, ultimately, and I'll conclude with this, I think where we're headed over the next generation on drug policy reform is the following. I think, first of all, marijuana, we are going to be taking it out of the criminal justice system and regulating it in a way like alcohol with different regulatory models around the US and around the world. And there may be increases in use, but we'll put the harms of prohibition, the arrests, and all of that behind. I think the second thing is ending the criminalization of drug possession. It's what Portugal's done, it's others, the evidence is now in. An excellent study in the British Journal of Criminology by Stevens and Hughes, basically showing no increase in drug use, but reductions in overdose, HIV, Hep C, arrest, crime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? I mean, basically that will eliminate another quarter of the arrests, it'll eliminate low-level police corruption in this society and others, and it'll enable us to treat addiction seriously as a health issue, not a criminal issue. To deal with it in the health framework, not in the criminal framework where it does not belong, right? The third thing, and this is going to be the most difficult, the most challenging, and the most important, because if we really are serious about trying to reduce the $300 billion a year black market in illegal drugs, if we really want to strip the gangsters in Mexico and other countries of much of the power they derive from these global black markets and drugs, if we really want to reduce this mass incarceration of people on drug charges, which increased tenfold in the last 30 years, well, we can shift a lot of resources to improving society and to treatment and to helping people who are struggling. We can invest in broader education and all these good things, We can look at the European social welfare model and say the best thing about their drug policy is their broader social welfare system. All true, but we live in America, right? But the other thing we're going to have to bite the bullet on is coming to grips with the idea that for those people who are most determined to get their drugs, who will, if you can't get them from a legal source, they're going to get them from the black market, and that's that for those people who are so determined to get their drugs, they'll buy them adulterated, inflated in price from the black market from criminals. We have to find a way to allow those people to get the drugs they want from a legal source without it becoming much more broadly available in our society in ways that may endanger public health more broadly. It's taking that heroin maintenance model that the Europeans and the Canadians are doing now and finding the ways to scale it up. Right? Maybe it won't mean allowing crack to be provided to them in a smokable form, but it may mean giving the drugs they want in an oral form where they may be free to convert it to another form and not sell it. I mean, different types of models. It's also going to mean with the stimulant drugs, with the amphetamine and methamphetamine and things like that, and cocaine, it means that we're going to need to become a lot more adventurous in looking at how we use things like oral stimulants as a way of trying to deal with people who are injecting or smoking stimulants. We're going to need to find ways to deal with a dedicated illegal stimulant user so they're no longer going to the black market even when they're not yet ready to stop. It's going to be the cutting edge of the next generation of harm reduction that people are barely talking about now. But designing those systems, figuring out those ways and ways that respect both the principles in public health and human rights is going to be pivotal. I define harm reduction as that point where public health and human rights intersects. Right? That needs to be the future, I believe, of public health. Human rights needs to be woven into those basic definitions, and we cannot turn our back on the harms of criminalization. It is a moral imperative, not just a policy and fiscal imperative, to move ourselves down this continuum to the greatest extent possible while still protecting public safety and health. Thank you very much. I think I need to go. So I'm sorry, my email me at drugpolicy.org, or website's drugpolicy.org. Please email me if you want to. I'll leave some business cards up on the back table for those of you who want it, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.